Hello and welcome to the 1895 podcast with me, Thomas D.
And me, Rob Cockerell.
And Rob, we're back here in the studio. We've returned from the Netherlands now. Obviously listened back to that podcast while we were live at our European CO2 Summit last week, but back in the studio and we're going to reflect on the full event now, aren't we?
We are. It's amazing how quickly it all goes in such a whirlwind. I did have to refresh my memory by listening to that live episode. That was fantastic.
Yeah, and great to get that panel of Johan, David, Chris and Mick. And we covered such a wide berth of the industry as well. And it was a perfect prelude to the event, which we then held over the next 2 days.
It was. It would go on to prove to be quite a compelling snapshot of the whole event and that I don't know, the feeling on the ground, the vibe in the room. I think that was captured quite well across that live panel, yeah.
And we'll get into some of those topics later on, but the key themes through that podcast and indeed the entire event did come down to biogas and DAC as well. We'll listen to some of the fantastic presentations that we had in this podcast, but we heard so much of that with Johan, David, Chris and Mick, didn't we?
We did, and another theme was utilization. I mean, some of those sessions around the new applications and the new technologies, they were popping off. They were almost difficult to chair or moderate because there were so many questions coming in, so many very technical questions, which was great to see. Certainly going over our head at times, wasn't it? But it was great to be the facilitator for all that, and we are in a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde CO2 market at the moment. It's unseasonably calm and quiet, no major shortages for a good couple of years now, so a good sense of stability there, but there's also so much going on and so much noise in the market around what that value chain looks like in the future. It's not our industry anymore, it's not our gases industry or our CO2 business, it's everyone's ecosystem, everyone's value chain, and a whole lot of conversation around sourcing, like biogas, like you said, and where do we go with this? How do we create those circular business models? So, yeah, really quiet on one hand, and we normally expect that to be the noisy part, and really busy on the other.
And perhaps that level of calm is what we need to really focus on the other half of the business and really focus our attention on shoring up that supply chain and continuing with the innovation within the CO2 industry.
Yeah, absolutely, because often the shortage is the catalyst for it, and then when things calm down, it's easy to take your eye off the ball or your foot off the gas and not make that change that needs to happen. But actually, like you said, it is providing a good perspective at the moment to take a step back and look at what comes next. So it's great to see.
It really was. And before we listen back to some of the sessions, Rotterdam, fantastic city, wasn't it? Great venue, great agenda, great area.
Loved it. I do love a European city break, to be fair. And that was the kind of feel you got. Very short flight in, very basic in many ways, but it did the job. It ticked all the boxes. And yes, you've got that incredible decarbonisation movement going on in Rotterdam and the Netherlands, and that was a whole raison d'etre for going there. It was all to bring all that together, all those talking points and overlaps in CO2 and decarbonisation and net zero, and I think we did a fantastic job of that, and that all of course was begun with our opening keynote.
Yeah, it leads nicely into our opening keynote. So let's return to Rotterdam, shall we? Not literally, figuratively.
I'll go back.
Of course, we'll be back in Utrecht in a few weeks' time. But for now, let's stay on CO2 and return to that opening keynote that was brought to us from Dorus, Bakker of the Port of Rotterdam Authority.
For me, one very important topic here today, and I think also for Port of Rotterdam, a very important topic is the fact that yes, we focus on decarbonization of this port cluster, but that should not mean the deindustrialization. It is key for us and for our larger cluster as a whole that we as Europe keep autonomy and that we develop as European industries in a decarbonized way. And we think that Port of Rotterdam is very well positioned to play a role there, given the fact that we have a very large industrial cluster. We are the largest energy port in Europe with over 13% of European energy flows coming through our port, and that provides a very good and stable basis for decarbonization in the years to come. If we look at the role for CCS in this industrial cluster, I'd like to highlight this picture that's been adopted from the International Energy Agency, where you see several different roles for CCS in industrial clusters. First of all, there's the retrofitting part, where refineries, power plants, and maybe even shipping could apply CCS. Then obviously there's the hard-to-abate sectors, such as the cement industry, iron and steel, and waste incineration plants. The hydrogen transition that we as Portals mainly serve, where we basically enable blue hydrogen production in the port cluster. And finally, carbon removal, where in the medium to long term we should and hopefully be able to apply bioenergy, CCS, and direct air capture maybe. From a port perspective, it is crucial that the right infrastructure is being developed here, and that we, as Port of Rotterdam, together with our partners, enable these different kind of flows, the different flows and sources of CO2, to move to the different end users, whether that's storage, like we do in Portals, or other applications with the view of usage, obviously. We basically see that by developing infrastructure, we are able to connect these different sources with the different demand areas, so to say, where in current phases we clearly see a focus on storage, but I'm well aware that the other alternative applications could become very feasible in the short run. And we already see usage, for example, taking place from Port of Rotterdam already for quite some time in the agriculture sector. Well, that also brings me to my next slide on biogenic CO2 with permanent storage that could eventually lead to carbon removal and negative emissions. And this one can be very interesting with the development of Port of Rotterdam as a green industrial cluster, where we see different kind of CO2 sources from biogenic CO2 that could become very helpful in realizing negative emissions in the longer run. If we focus on the CCS projects that are currently taking place in Port of Rotterdam, we see Portals being the front runner there. We are currently constructing this project where we are developing a large onshore pipeline from Pernis all the way to the western part of the port, a 10 million ton per annum pipeline that enables decarbonization of this large cluster. For Portals in phase 1, 2.5 million tons per annum of this onshore capacity will be used, and that will be compressed in a large compressor station in the western part of the port, and the CO2 will be through an offshore pipeline be transported to the P18 gas platform, where it will be permanently stored in the P18 gas fields. These 2.5 million tons per annum will be transported and stored for a 15-year period, achieving 37 million tons of stored CO2 in total over the lifetime of the project. As mentioned, we are currently well underway in the construction phase, and if you have the chance to visit the port, you can see construction activities taking place actually right now. We hope and aim to be operating by 2026, so next year already, and thereby also hope to kickstart the CO2 and CCS industry in Rotterdam with some very large and interesting projects basically following up. The first one I'd like to mention is the Aramis project. That's a joint venture by Gasunie, EBN, Shell and Total Energies, focusing on the development of a large CO2 hub in Rotterdam with a 22 million ton per annum pipeline from the Maasvlakte all the way to the northern part of the Dutch North Sea, where very large offshore storage capacity is available. This project is, I think, 1 or 2 years after Portals, and is currently in its study phase, and we hope to see an FID decision soon in order for that project to progress as well. Third project on the slide, CO2 Next. That's the plan for a liquid CO2 terminal adjacent to the Portals compressor station. This project is being developed by Gasunie, Vopak, Shell and Total Energies, and aims to import liquid CO2 flows from other industrial clusters and enable it to transport into the Aramis offshore trunk line for storage offshore. Obviously, the CO2 infrastructure that is needed to decarbonize Northwestern Europe is not only present in Rotterdam itself, but it requires connections to other clusters. I've selected 3 showcase projects that are currently in earlier phases of development: the Delta Rhine Corridor, the Delta Schelde connection, and an existing project, OCAP. The Delta Rhine Corridor is a large project that shall connect the port of Rotterdam with the Dutch and German hinterland, and is focused on transporting hydrogen to the hinterland and taking CO2 from this industrial hinterland, transporting it to Rotterdam in order to connect to the Aramis system there. And unfortunately, a 4-year delay was announced on this project earlier this year, but at the same time, or actually a little bit later, the hydrogen pipeline and CCS pipeline in the project got a development boost and are now currently planned for the early 2030s to be in operations. The Delta Schelde connection is similar in terms of the scope, but focuses on the ports in Zeeland and Antwerp and Bruges, and aims to transport CO2 from those industrial clusters to Port of Rotterdam as well, in order to connect to the Aramis system there. Finally, OCAP, an existing pipeline, and I think a very good example of, well, the fact that CCS business might sound new, but actually a lot of stuff is taking place already for quite some time. OCAP has an existing pipeline that connects the Port of Rotterdam with the horticulture sector north of the port, and transports CO2 in order to grow crops quicker and better. And that has been in operation for quite some time already. And there could obviously be very valuable connections with the portal system there as well. And as you can see on the map, the OCAP pipeline can even be used to connect to other clusters in the Netherlands, and also enable transport of CO2 from the Amsterdam area, for example. I'd like to finalize this presentation with a call to action, actually, because we have seen over the course of the past years that there are, well, strong developments taking place in the port. We are proud to say that we are developing a CCS network, that we're developing a hydrogen network, that we're working on residual heat. And at the same time, we see that we're in a complex and difficult geopolitical situation currently. It is key for the development of this port cluster that we do sustainable developments, and sustainable industry for us means a future-proof industry. That also means that we shall facilitate this energy transition and material transition, and we need to get the right structures in place to keep developments going. We currently see quite some challenges, for example, related to energy prices, but also related to permitting. And for us as a port cluster, it is key that those issues are being solved, so that we, together with clients, together with the Dutch government, together with the European Union, are able to have a strong cluster, to retain a strong cluster, and to be able to keep production, basically, of this base industry present in this part of the world. That also means we should achieve low carbon production with low carbon products, and we need investments flowing in CCS. We've seen with portals that it takes quite some time and quite some years and, well, persistence to develop a project, but we also require investments basically to flow. So whether that's investments in storage sites, in infrastructure, or investments in CO2 as a feedstock, we need both of them to develop this cluster and to remain competitive. And that also means focusing on innovations, for example, related to onboard carbon capture and other new techniques. And finally, I'd really like to push for European collaboration, because I'm convinced that only through collaboration with private parties, with governments, and with state-owned companies like ours, it's possible to achieve the energy transition in Europe. With portals, we are right now in this construction phase, and I truly hope that if we'd be standing here in 2 years' time, we see new projects that are being under construction, portals will be operational, and this new era of industrial development in Rotterdam has taken place. Later today, my colleague Mark Driessen will focus more on the development of the Portals project itself and the detailed story of Portals. This has been the story of the Port of Rotterdam from a CO2 perspective.
And that was Dorus Bakker there from the Port of Rotterdam Authority. A quote I really liked, he said right at the start, was decarbonisation, not deindustrialisation. And that really goes back to the whole ethos that they're bringing to the Netherlands and wider Europe.
Yeah, exactly. And we have actually heard that slightly different take on it, but that comparison before is this decarbonisation or defossilization. Yeah, it's a bit of everything. And I like that sentiment, that quote you've picked out, because as Dorus is trying to explain there, look, we can do this. It doesn't have to mean we bring everything to a halt. We don't have to stop progress and stop economic growth. We just have to decarbonise it a little bit. And we've got everything in front of us to be able to do that. And they are proving it with all of their case studies.
Absolutely. He talked through CCUS, infrastructure development, the timelines they have, and the need for that investment in CCUS. So a great snapshot and a great way to open the event, I thought.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
And then we got into session 2, didn't we, which was markets and feedstocks. And I'd like to bring a clip here from Pablo Molina from the European Biogas Association. And he really talked through, the biogas markets and the trends that we're seeing too.
So what are the trends that are currently occurring in the market? So biogas is today. Here I will give you just a summary of the main stats of the sector, but I will go deeper into some of these stats in the upcoming slides, so I will not stop so much here. So in 2023, 22 BCM, or billion cubic meters of biogases were produced in Europe. I already mentioned that this represents more than the entire production of Belgium, Denmark, and Ireland combined. I'm talking about biogases to refer to biogas and biomethane, but biomethane itself, it was 4.9 BCMs that were produced in 2023. There's already 25 European countries that are currently active in the biomethane production, and we see the biggest growth rate for biomethane of 18% last year. Moreover, we can see at the right side of the slide the different end uses for the biomethane sector, for transport, buildings, power generation, and the industry. When it comes to the digestate and organic fertilizers, there's the potential to replace 15% of the nitrogen-based fertilizers in the EU. And I think upcoming now, the number that you all want to know, what is the potential from biogenic CO2? But don't worry, I will definitely go deeper into this number in the upcoming slides. It's 29 million tons of biogenic CO2 that were produced in Europe from biogases in 2023. And as I already mentioned, 250,000 green jobs that were produced in Europe. Now let's take a deeper look into the stats itself. So those 22 BCM of biogases that were produced in Europe. When I talk about about biogases, I'm talking about biogas and biomethane, just to remind you this. And as I already mentioned before, this 22 BCM can also be compared to 7% of EU gas consumption in 2023. So we can have an idea of the importance of biomethane to provide us that energy security that is much needed in our continent. More or less, from this 22 BCM, 19 BCM were produced in the EU 27. When I talk about Europe, I'm talking about also non-member states like Ukraine, Switzerland, or the United Kingdom. And now let's look at the graphs and how the trends have evolved. It's quite a big graph, so let's take a closer look at the last 5 years, so we can concentrate our attention there. And on lighter green, we see the biogas production, and darker green, we see the biomethane. So what we can see from the biogas is that the production has been quite stable over the past 5 years. And the reason for this is that the market trends are to switch towards biomethane because the separation technologies are already mature and the business cases, what that makes sense today is to produce biomethane and go towards this change. That's the reason we also see how biomethane has been increasing these past 5 years. And now on the next slide, I will talk to you about this as well. I've already mentioned that we've got the biggest growth on biomethane production to date. That this was in 2023, 4.9 BCMs. This represents 80% year-on-year growth in Europe and 21% in the EU 27. And we also have biomethane map that we release each year. And our latest update was in the first quarter of 2024, where we already knew that the biomethane capacity had grown to 6.4 BCM. Now you might wonder, okay, what are the countries that might make more sense for me to search for my biogenic CO2? The countries that are fastest growing are Italy, France, Denmark, and the UK. Nonetheless, Germany remains as the top producer, but these are the countries that have been growing the fastest. And when we look at the trends as well, what we can see from the past 2 years is that that the biggest growth of 18%, and we expect this growth to continue. If we look at the plants, I will go a bit faster here, as I don't want to run out of time. There's been more than 200 new biomethane plants in 2023. This represents the total amount of plants of 1,510 biomethane plants. So if you're looking for your biogenic CO2, this can be the possible solutions. And the 25 biomethane producing European countries, we can also see on the slide, on the graph, how this has changed. We see a decrease in 2023 with the number of plants compared to 2022, and this is due to market, some instabilities on the market and conditions from the policy side. Now, I think the most important and what all of you have been waiting for is to talk about the biogenic CO2. And to do that, I will first go to how does the biogenic CO2 even compare from biomethane even compared to other technologies. So we'll look at two different parameters. The first one I've already explained to you, the concentration. We've got a high concentration of biogenic CO2 because you already have to separate the biomethane from it if you want to produce it, from 96 to 100%. Well, what about the cost? So we've got a capture cost of around 25 to 90 euros per ton, depending on the country, because at the end of the day, most of these costs will come from the liquefaction itself. So what conclusions can we bring from this? Is that the CO2 separation is already a part of the existing process. If you want to upgrade biomethane, you must separate the biogenic CO2 and capture it. You also have a low carbon capture cost. Don't worry, I will show you in the other side of the slide how does this cost compare to other technologies. It's a mature technology. It's already been developed for the past 20 years, and these past 5 years has reached its needed maturity. And the costs are mostly associated with the liquefaction process. Now, let's look at the different percentage of concentration and the capture costs. I know it's a big table, so let's bring your attention to the upper side of the table. And what we see here, I also put in bold the biogenic sources. So on the upper side of the table, we have higher concentrations, so natural gas, coal to chemicals, ammonia, bioethanol that was also mentioned. This is one of the biogenic sources, ethylene dioxide or hydrogen from steam methane reforming. And what we see here, we've got low costs as well, but most of these sources are fossil sources, except the bioethanol. But the problem about bioethanol is that most of its potential is 5 times lower than the biomethane potential. And when we look at the lower side of the table, we've got all the biogenic sources like paper and pulp, waste to energy, biomass for power and heat. But you can see the main issue is the concentration, which is quite lower, and also the costs are higher. And at the bottom of the table, we see direct air capture, which we understand and we acknowledge the role it will play in the future. Nonetheless, the concentration remains quite low, and also the cost can be 10 times higher than what's currently available, and it is known that this cost will decrease, but will never reach 15 or 25 in the upcoming 5 years. Okay, this is what you're telling us today, but how will the sector evolve in the future? When we take a look, we know that we need an accelerated growth to reach that 35 BCM repower EU target by 2030. At the moment, the current biomethane growth rate is 21%, which is still close to the national energy and climate plans for 2030. But nonetheless, we need more than that. We need optimal market conditions and regulatory conditions. So we need to have a coherent planning of biomethane potential and a faster permitting process that can also be a challenge and a barrier. We can take a look here at how it might grow. So on the purple, we see the NECP's targets. In the lighted blue, we see the current if we maintain the current growth. And we see on the upper side, on dark green, the current potential that biomethane can unlock and how much it is compared to the 35 BCM target by 2030. Here you can also see the potential for several countries, where Germany, France, and Spain are taking the lead. That will also be needed to unlock this potential biomethane and thus the potential of biogenic CO2. And for I already mentioned before in our biomethane outlook investment, there's already 27 billion that are earmarked to be invested in biomethane. This will add 6.3 BCM by 2030, more than 950 plants in the coming years, and Denmark, Poland, and Italy are the leading countries on these investments. Now to finalize, and sorry Rob, I know I'm a bit out of time, how can we scale up the biogenic CO2 from biomethane? So the first point is we need solid and consistent regulatory framework that can give that clear signal to project developers and de-risk those investments. We also need the creation of a certification scheme and trade registry that can allow the cross-border trade of biogenic CO2, but also to recognize the value of biogenic CO2 in the market. The organization of efficient supply chains will be also crucial to tapping into that large potential, and I think this is where most of you have the experience of the already CO2 infrastructure or how the logistics are, and it will be very relevant to unlock and optimize these supply chains. And by last, we need to increase the investments on R&D in order to speed up the development of new technologies, novel feedstocks, and improve efficiency.
And that was Pablo Molina there from the European Biogas Association. Great to get those facts, those figures, that future outlook as well. And biogas, a huge topic for us at the moment and a huge topic that ran through the event.
Yep. I mean, first of all, listeners or attendees in our summit in Austria last year will remember we had the World Biogas Association to speak. This time we drilled down with the European Biogas Association and got a much more comprehensive view of this region and what's happening. Fantastic. I mean, I'd spoken just before Pablo on behalf of CO2 View and explained that there's huge potential in this biogas side of things and this biogenic CO2. And I think, if I can recall those numbers I was presenting, we said in Europe today only around 4% of CO2 sourcing comes from biogas or biomass. So that shows you there's a huge window of opportunity there to improve those numbers and improve that market share going forward. Of course, we've got to remember that biogenic CO2 is not just biogas, it's all kinds of waste, landfill waste, for example. But yeah, biogas is a huge opportunity, and we know why. We're talking about that 40% stream of CO2 that comes off that biogas that's produced and cleaned up. So a big byproduct there. And our live poll across the event, Tom, I think the result was comfortably in the high 80s. I think more than 85% of our audience across the 2.5 days said that biogenic CO2 was the most promising future pathway for CO2 production. So very compelling story there.
Yeah, big figure. And I actually had the chance to speak to Pablo following his presentation at the event. So if listeners do want to go and watch that interview that I conducted with him, then they can find that on gasworld.com. Well worth a watch.
Absolutely, definitely.
Let's now move into session 2 and focus on another of the big topics of the event and one
contentious.
Contentious. It feels like a topic that we've been discussing at our events now. Well, we've been discussing it for a little while, but especially over the last 12 months, hasn't it?
Yeah, direct air capture, or DAC. As expected, this became a bit of a thorny issue across the 2 days, particularly on the second day. Yeah, I think we've got into this quite a bit in the last 12 to 18 months across the European CO2 Summit, the North American CO2 Summit as well. Had some great conversations, some great calls to action. We've had some speakers calling out other speakers, and then the riposte that's been delivered in the next session. So it's been very enjoyable. And yet I think we've probably kind of skirted around the fringes of the topic a little bit until now. We've always talked about this bright new technology that could be part of the future solutions in CO2, but we've never really got under the bonnet, as one of our speakers said, and got into the heart of it. So it was great to do that in Rotterdam with Rob van Straten from Skytree.
So let me take you through some of the demand drivers. This morning, Rob, you said, what was it, 8.6 billion market size in the merchant market. I've seen predictions a little bit higher as well. And then e-fuels kicking in, similar to DECs, expected to take place over many years. From our perspective, we are already involved in pilot projects in several countries where the intention is to scale up with DEC as well. But there's also other sources of CO2 for use. As an example, Dutch greenhouses emit around 6 million tons of CO2 per annum, mostly generated by their cogen systems, their gas-powered heating systems that produce heat, electricity, and CO2. And the Dutch greenhouse industry has to reduce the use of fossil fuels by 50% in 2030 and by 100% in 2040. That means that they're switching to different heat sources, geothermal, electric boilers, and then they don't have a source of CO2 anymore. So there's transitions in the current supply chain happening also in perhaps unexpected areas. The other big driver is the negative emissions, is permanent storage, where most of the DEC projects have been famous for. And of course, if you take CO2 out of the air and you store it permanently versus temporarily, like in a tomato, you create negative emissions. There's a third driver as well. Actually, this morning, we were on the front page of the Financieel Dagblad, the Dutch newspapers. We announced yesterday a large project in Texas together with EDF, where we take abundant renewable energy, preventing negative prices from these assets. That's a great start of a business case. And then we supplement that with a permanent load. And in this way, we will build a DEC facility that will capture and store 500,000 tons of CO2 per annum. And that's the second project we published in Texas, as the other project that we published in November is built upon a purpose-built windmill farm. But if you think of a wider energy transition, wider energy landscape, then if you use your imagination, you could put DEC machines, DEC parks, large-scale DEC facilities in an area where it's easy to have renewable energy. Morocco or Australia or Chile or wherever these locations are. Then if you convert that energy into into CO2 molecules, you don't have to have a local storage site. You can add downstream processes to create, for instance, e-methanol. That's easy to transport to industrial areas. So there are new horizons, I would say, for CO2 coming from DEC, other than replacing the metal cylinders that are delivered to McDonald's. And then it's all about costs. So, sorry, Pablo, but the 0.04 CO2 molecules ppm isn't the biggest cost factor, as it's not that energy intensive to take the CO2 out of an airstream. Most of the energy goes into releasing the CO2 in our technology, which is solid sorbent based on a vacuum temperature swing. But when you look at the costs, there is no such thing as cost per ton from direct air capture. It doesn't exist. So if you look at what Climeworks is saying, I'm trying to remember, they are like €600 or dollar per ton. That's for Climeworks on their facility in Iceland. Has nothing to do with other DEC projects. I've seen prices, levelized cost, I should say, of CO2 of €100 per ton. It depends. If you're in UAE, you get renewable electricity from the grid for, 1.2 euro cent per kilowatt hour. There's a large project there that we are bidding for that has a payback time of less than 2 years compared to CO2 supply from fossil fuel sources in that region. So what is the utilization of the DAC facility? Is it 24 hours a day or is it during daytime? So is the energy included and at what cost, as I just explained? So is the liquefaction included? Do we need liquid CO2? And also, what is the cost of capital? And I've seen large-scale projects where the calculations were initially based on a large-scale plant, like a chemical plant. And then it's a first of a kind. And first of a kind attracts risk premiums. The EPC partner put 20% risk, the financiers put 30% risk on it, and the interest is 14%, and the cost of capital in a very large project that I've seen were even bigger than the cost of capture. This is also why companies like us and also Air Capture, who's on stage tomorrow, our colleagues from the US, are on a strategy to build distinct machines that you can put somewhere where you need the CO2, or that you can use to build a large DAC facility, de-risking the technology by first installing one system and showing that to investors to fuel the FID. There's a lot of, smoke and mirrors around the cost of DAC. Every DAC startup puts on his website that they're below or will be below $100 per ton. So do we, but not always. The drivers for the costs are, most of all, a smart technology. And there are many technologies out there. The technology that we selected, the solid sorbent technology, has the benefit that it's based on an existing industry.
And that was Rob van Straten there of Skytree. I mean, so much we could speak to him about.
He's a cool speaker.
He's a cool speaker. And as we've said, we're going to dedicate 3 episodes to this European CO2 Summit, and we're going to bring our audience the entire DAC panel that we held on the second day of the event, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of ground in sessions 2, 3, 4 around decarbonisation, storage and transportation, some of those technologies and innovations going on at the moment. But obviously for the pod, we couldn't bring all of those speakers to life here. You'll have to go back and catch up on the coverage. But we did think that Rob was a good one because he did captivate the audience, didn't he?
He did.
He's got a certain swagger about him on stage as well, which shows confidence in the technology. And
honesty as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he was happy to be contested about a few points and then give his response, which is always good to see for healthy, constructive debate. So yeah, a good pick there, Tom, to bring him out. And as you said, it perfectly weighs up the next episode with that DAC panel.
And as with Pablo, I did speak to Rob following his presentation. So once again, go and watch that on gasworld.com. Into day 2 now, and we kicked that off with EIGA, didn't we? And Robert Skribanek, who introduced us to the second day.
We did, yeah. Of course, we had a recent 1895 episode with EIGA, the European Industrial Gases Association, or EIGA, I think as is said on the continent. Yeah, good to get Robert on stage. He gave quite a good viewpoint in terms of setting out the challenges we've got in decarbonisation, this whole energy transition, and then almost the gases industry's role in that and where CO2 comes into that. So it was another good reminder of the challenges ahead and the imperative challenges we need to meet, and then, what's coming down the track.
And it was the delivery of that keynote as well that I remember
calm.
fondly. Very calm, very concise, measured,
yep.
And very powerful as well. So let's listen to a short snippet of that.
Since the onset of industrial times, humans managed to raise atmospheric CO2 levels by 50%. And CO2 concentration had been below the 300 ppm level for several glacial cycles. That means hundreds of thousands of years, until 1911, when it was first and last crossed. The impacts of human activities on global warming are being observed, experienced, and are expected to intensify over the coming years and decades. Such effects are the average global temperature is around 1.2 degrees higher than before industrial times, causing massive heat waves around the globe. Due to the higher temperature, sea level rise and endanger coastal areas. Ice caps on the polar circles, and glaciers melt at an unprecedented rate, causing serious disruptions in our ecosystem. Some regions, on the other hand, are experiencing more severe and longer droughts, impacting our food supply chain. And climate change has also a significant impact on our psychology and also social relations, causing displacement of populations, mass migration, and according to recent psychological research, one of the leading factors in the last 2 decades to suicides. However, we're not doing this alone. Mother Nature has also her fair share. Good examples are volcanoes. Volcanic eruptions emit around 200 to 300 million tons of CO2 every single year into the atmosphere. In contrast to this, we humans do a way better job. Our emission rate is about 60 times over. Some of you might still remember December 1980, Mount St. Helens' massive and explosive eruption that emitted tremendous amount of CO2 into the atmosphere that actually matched human emission for 9 hours. And not today, 45 years ago. This is the current situation in the environment. Now we need to deal with it. Luckily, we are smart enough and have several options. Okay? Some of these options are turning CO2 into valuable fuel. This is an area of active research, and several promising technologies are being explored and implemented to capture CO2 and turn it into fuel energy sources. The ultimate goal is to reduce atmospheric CO2. Some of these options are, let's say, electrochemical reduction, turning CO2 into CO or even the more versatile syngas, biological conversion with algae and several species of Clostridia and ulva bacteria, artificial photosynthesis, mimicking Mother Nature to convert CO2 into ethanol, methanol, or even hydrocarbons. Green ammonia can also play a crucial role as a synthetic fuel to establish a greener shipping industry. 4-stroke ammonia engines are already available. 2-strokes are being developed in Germany by one of the leading design and manufacturing bureaus. Around 940 million tons of CO2 are emitted each year by maritime shipping. So synthetic fuels like ammonia can definitely help this industry to reach their ultimate goal, reduce greenhouse gas emission to zero. When I studied at college, I was lucky enough and had the opportunity to meet the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry in 1994, Professor George Olah, really believed in the methanol economy. The first renewable methanol plant was constructed around 15 years ago in Iceland and named after the professor. Several years of research, the catalyst development and engineering improvement followed in order to reach their current capacity, which is around 4,000 tons per year of renewable methanol, and recycling about 5,500 tons of CO2 is what's not emitted. Research are still ongoing. Like a good example is the Technische Universiteit Wien, where a nanocatalyst was designed and produced based on aluminum foil residues and spent batteries to turn CO2 into methanol. In the agriculture, not only green fertilizers can be a solution, but imagine when you create a resilient and sophisticated system where you let trees turn carbon dioxide into useful biomass while you maintain a healthy soil structure, increase water retention, and enhance biodiversity. But mentioning fertilizers, a crucial nitrogen fertilizer is urea. Green urea production is key toward a sustainable life in the future and to reduce our carbon footprint. Utilizing green energy, turning CO2 and hydrogen into green urea can definitely revolutionize the fertilizer industry.
And that was Robert Skribanek of EIGA.
Yeah, very, as we said, very measured and no less urgent or impassioned, but just delivered quite calmly. And I think that's important sometimes. We can all get a bit lost in the who's shouting loudest about this net zero situation, but that was a really eloquent talk from Robert.
Yes, fantastic. Into session 5 now, and this was the first of our utilisation sessions.
And this one was really going off, wasn't it?
This was. I mean, I remember you said it on stage. This is the most questions I think you remember ever seeing in our Q&A for the two speakers that we had.
The most I have ever put through in a session. And there were plenty that I couldn't get through as well. We just did not have the time. To be fair to our two speakers, Bert from Oxylum and Gil Shetlands from Decarbon, they absolutely smashed it. They delivered as many answers to those questions as they could. They tried to do quick fire ones, they did more in-depth ones, but yeah, we just could not get through them all. And that underlined what a fantastic session that is and how critical this whole U in CCUS is.
And both local to the area as well, which really helped give that local perspective too.
Yeah.
But should we listen to Bert, shall we, and see what he has to say about e-fuels and the circular economy.
It's too easy, it's not logical to just store CO2 into the ground, because actually this CO2, this carbon in this molecule, it holds value for us. It holds a value for us as a society, it holds value for us as an industry. So it's our philosophy to not just store the CO2 into the ground once that it's captured, but that we should start using it, that we should start leveraging the carbon that is in this molecule. And this is exactly what we are doing at Oxylum. At Oxylum, we have developed a technology that allows us to convert the CO2, to convert the carbon with renewable electricity into sustainable chemical feedstocks. Think about carbon monoxide, formic acid, ethylene. So these are really the base chemicals that our industry is using today, and this is really the base chemicals that today we are making from fossil fuels. So if we can make these base chemicals from CO2 and from renewable energy, this means that we can convert our entire industry towards a sustainable industry just by replacing the feedstocks that we are using at the beginning, and the rest of the industry we can keep as is. So how are we doing this? Like I mentioned, our goal is to do this with CO2 electrolyzers, electrochemistry. So very similarly to the water electrolyzers that we all know to produce green hydrogen, we are using fundamentally the same science. We have two electrodes. We have a negative electrode and a positive electrode. And while in normal water electrolyzers you would just put water in between them, we are doing it slightly different. We feed CO2, carbon dioxide, to this system as a gas. And instead of water being converted to hydrogen gas, our CO2 will absorb to the surface of the negative electrode, and it will absorb the energy of the electricity that we apply to those two electrodes. So with the energy that the CO2 is absorbing, it will react towards hydrocarbons. Again, think about carbon monoxide, think about formic acid, think about ethylene. So we really started fundamentally with this technology back in 2016 when I did my PhD at the University of Antwerp. And ever since we have developed it step by step to make it bigger, to make it better, to make it more industrial. So far, we have already obtained quite a strong IP portfolio in this area, and we have done several tests with our products that were produced from CO2 with potential end clients. And finally, as of last year, we have developed our first containerized demo unit where we convert CO2 to formic acid in the scale of 10 kilowatts.
And that was Bert de Mott of Oxylum there. Like you say, a fantastic session, and it's a shame we can't bring more of that to our listeners.
Absolutely. Two hugely intelligent speakers and still very dynamic as well, good presence on stage. And it was interesting actually from Bert to see him kind of pivot that talk and the title away from e-fuels to e-chemicals and open up the opportunities in that space.
And talking about the value that CO2 holds for him, and not only, of course, him, but the wider world too.
Absolutely. And I think both gave a call to action, didn't they? In terms of, look, we are looking for partnerships. We are looking for willing stakeholders, collaborators. So again, if you're an event provider, that's exactly what you want to see. You want to provide that. But everyone, if you're listening, go and get in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Then we went into session 6, continuing on the utilisation theme, but discussing investing this time, wasn't it? So this was all about finance and investment in various technologies, biogas, carbon capture, utilisation and such.
Yep, and those bankable structures, as we called it in one of the talks. We talk about hydrogen a lot on this pod, and a lot at GasWorld and H2View as a whole. And listeners, viewers, readers, you'll all know one of the biggest stumbling blocks in that whole hydrogen movement has been FID, that final investment decision, the funding, and all the nuances around that. So this was a critical session. It's all very well talking about the technologies out there, the innovations that are out there, but you've got to be able to get the investment for them and make the business case stack up.
And as with many of the other sessions, so much ground was covered in this session. I think it would be worthwhile being able to bring the whole hour and a half to our listeners, wouldn't it? But for this, we're going to go to Adam Forsyth of Longspur Capital, and I think he gave a great snapshot of the activity that is in biogas currently, and he gave a lot of information on policy as well.
In the biogas space, we've seen a lot of activity. Biogas financing, I think, has got to a stage where we can fund deals. I'm not going to say easily. Financing is never easy. It's always hard work. But we are seeing momentum in this space. I think over the past 3 years, we've seen a pickup in financial activity. The last deal we did it's quite interesting. It's a large-scale deal, 120 million euro debt raise. Interestingly, although it is a subsidized offtake, the feeling is this could have been done unsubsidized. It also doesn't have a feedstock contract. So it's merchant on the supply side, if you want, and yet we still were able to get very good debt terms. I think that shows the maturity of the biogas space and biomethane space from a funding point of view. And it's not just us. The market, I think, remains fairly active. And that's good news for the pure biogas and biomethane space. We're seeing bigger deals, we're seeing bigger projects, and we're seeing, I think, particularly of interest for you today, is we're seeing a lot of upgrading from biogas to biomethane. This isn't quite so true in the carbon dioxide space. Now, I'm slightly using the terms CCS, CDR, carbon dioxide removal, interchangeably because I'm trying to take a fairly wide view of what's going on. The funding space has been dominated last year by the two big deals that were done in the UK around the Track 1 funding scheme on the East Coast cluster. And these are very big, very material deals. And I think it shows what can be done, but they're very large-scale projects. They're not necessarily indicative of the sort of projects people would like to see done. And it's not to say nothing else is happening. This is not a dead space. We are seeing funding happening, but it's nothing like we've been seeing in the biogas space. And if we look at the overall picture, the full global stats, and I would say, I think there's several providers of this sort of data. It probably doesn't pick up every deal that's out there, but I think it's a good picture of what we're seeing. And you can see that in biogas we have had 3 very good years, although a little bit of a drop in 24, but the number of deals being done is still very active. Whereas in CO2, if we stripped out those 2 large deals, then the funding is still much less. And I think that probably reflects a different stage in the industry, but I'll come on and talk about that in a little bit more. In biogas, we're seeing the US leading. Generally the phrase there, renewable natural gas, but it does have, and has for some time, I think, been quite active. Whereas clearly, carbon capture and storage, it's been a UK story because of those 2 deals. We think a big reason for biogas being in a good place at the moment is we have very supportive legislation, very supportive policies. And I think that's absolutely critical. We tend to look across the clean energy sector at 3 main funding risks. And these are technology, market risk, competitive risk, and policy risk. And I would say for investors right now, policy risk is the big issue. So I feel that within Europe on biogas, we're in not a bad place. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are very aware of the various programs. We have clear targets. We have, I think, reasonably clear support mechanisms. And as I said earlier, we're getting to a stage where we're even beginning to look at subsidy-free projects. As I say, the project we did could have been subsidy-free, but wasn't. We are seeing, I think, Future Biogas doing a project with AstraZeneca as the off-taker in the UK, which itself is subsidy-free. It's not relying on policies. Just want to say a bit about UK policy support, because that's where we've had the 2 big deals in the UK. And as I said earlier, the UK policy is very committed. There is a bit of uncertainty at the moment because we have a spending review coming up in the summer, but I think overall the policy is very much going in the right direction. We have subtle differences in various programs. They've tried to almost atomize the response to different solutions, whether that is power into CCS or bioenergy into CCS or waste into carbon sequestration, carbon removal. Slightly different schemes. But most of them are looking to provide price support rather than to give a subsidy. And that is essentially the contract for difference mechanism. And that's been hugely successful in UK renewables. It's been hugely successful, we heard yesterday on the project here where the Dutch scheme is essentially a very similar scheme. And we're seeing that CDF mechanism being picked up actually elsewhere in the EU and in China, because it allows price support, because investors really at the end of the day want to know there's a market there. And in that market, they're looking for volume, they're looking for price, and they're looking for risk. And essentially a contract for difference mechanism is dealing with that risk element, which is very important and has been shown to work. Slight complexity into the way the UK is doing it. I think that's probably necessary and good, but I think it is working and working in the right direction to the fact that we have these 2 big deals. So the first of these deals is a gas turbine with carbon capture. So it's not a removal technology, but it is a carbon capture technology. And then the second big deal that got done is our transmission and storage, which is actually a slightly different form of policy support. It's a regulatory asset-based mechanism, but it's been sufficient to get these two big projects underway. There's a third project in the second cluster in the UK. It's a waste-to-energy project. I put it down here so it's reached financial close. It's mainly around the waste element that has been financially closed. I wouldn't say it's as indicative as the other two, but it does show that we are getting activity, which is helpful, and activity, I think, supported by policy. I also wanted to talk, I think it's worth mentioning what's going on in the US around carbon capture and storage and policy as well, because this is clearly an area that is worrying investors, and we've seen investors back off. We work with Drax, which is the big biomass generator in the UK, which is looking to add carbon capture and storage to create a bioenergy and carbon capture solution to enable the UK to hit its net zero targets. But because it has a good skill set in that area, it is looking to invest and has already identified 2 sites for bioenergy and carbon capture projects in the United States. At least it was until last month, where it said it's not investing another penny until it sees further clarity. And this is the problem we face. So, and it's sad because the US had probably the best carbon capture support mechanism out there done through tax credits. Now, the US has had both the production tax credit system and the investment tax credit system. These came in the 70s with the oil crisis. They've been hugely successful in supporting solar and wind renewable energy. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, which Joe Biden brought in, we saw an uptick in the support that was going into carbon capture and storage. And I should say carbon capture and utilization, because it was actually quite supportive for enhanced oil recovery as well. You get a lesser value, but there's still value there. And last week, Scott Perry, I would say quite an extreme Republican congressman, put forward a bill to repeal 45Q, which is the key tax credit for carbon capture and storage. And it's interesting that in the Project 2025 mandate for leadership paper, which could be seen as the current Republican administration's manifesto, the only tax code that gets mentioned is 45Q with a call for its removal. So there's been quite a lot of concern that this could go, and we now have a bill. However, the bill is co-sponsored by a Democrat who's probably, if the Republican's at one extreme, that Democrat is at the other extreme. I think actually might have slightly misspelled his name, but that is probably going to be a difficult bill to get through when you have that extreme co-sponsorship. But we do have risk around this, and I think the market sees that risk. And maybe this case is going to be an interesting test case to see what happens with extreme bills, which could be damaging for investment in the space in the US. The key paper for us, and actually the thing we've looked at, is the Unleashing American Energy Executive Order, which was seen as actually almost tearing up the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't, and I think that's quite important. Particularly, it doesn't for tax credits. And we had to have a confirmation memo coming out of the Office of Measurement and Budget to actually point out that actually that executive order didn't go quite as far as some people thought it did. And particularly around tax credits. Tax credits can't be ripped up with an executive order. It needs Congress to make the change. And we've already had a letter from 18 Republican congressmen before the election, I would say, so last summer, in support of tax credits. But I think the important thing is that for 45Q and for carbon capture and storage, you are seeing support for the oil industry and for the ethanol industry. Ethanol's farmers vote. So our view is that actually this is probably going to remain intact. But as I say, it's quite an interesting bellwether. We do see, and you can see I've put a couple of tables here, we do see support elsewhere in the Republican administration from key ministers, key secretaries, the Secretary of State for Energy and Secretary of State for the Interior. In their confirmation hearings, they have been supportive of carbon capture and storage.
And that was Adam Forsyth of Longspur Capital there. Great to get into all of that. Great to hear about UK policy, US policy, 45Q, the IRA, and all of that. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely a moving target all the time. Listeners, if you want more on that session, tell us. Get in touch. Drop us a line. We could release that as a future episode. No plans to at the moment, but that's a critical topic. So if you're interested, tell us and we'll do it.
Absolutely. Into session 7 now, and the final session that we're going to bring our listeners on this particular podcast anyway, and that's the validating side of things. Again, 3 fantastic speakers. We had Blair McMaster of DMV, Stephen B. Harrison of SPH4 Consulting, and Jürgen Reimann of Envia.
Yeah, absolutely. Covering all parts of it. If we said, investment and FID was key and how we go about that, then validating those investments, validating those business cases and those technologies is clearly just as important. So again, this was a really important session. I was happy with how those 3 back-to-back sessions played out. We looked at the technologies that are there. We looked at how you fund them and invest, and then we looked at how you validate them and do that critical due diligence, which, Tom, we heard on the stage, Steve talking about getting under the bonnet of investments and doing the due diligence and seeing if they're really as robust as their sales pitch points out.
Probably a part of the process that's overlooked.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. And some great advice given there for all of that. So, yeah, this was a key session.
Yes, key session. And for this, we're going to dive into Blair McMaster's presentation from DMV and hear about the validating of CCUS technology and the considerations that need to be made there.
So now I'm going to take a look at what capture technologies are available and what maturity they're at. This is the maturity session after all. And the good news is we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. So the plot on the right here is a very recent publication from the EU Joint Research Council, looking at different capture technologies. Many of them will be very, very familiar to those of you working in biogas and biogas upgrading. And we can see a huge range of technologies available, but we can also see that the maturity here is quite variable. So this scale is the EU Horizon 2020 TRL scale, where TRL 9 is the maximum. That's a commercial viable product. TRL 6 to 7 would be pilot or demonstration scale. And you can see there's a huge range there, with the most mature technologies, such as amine absorption, being towards TRL 9, and some exciting developments further down. One thing I'd highlight with these less mature technologies is they're often modular technologies. So they're designed to come in shipping containers. They're designed to be scaled up by duplication. And that means you can enable quite rapid TRL process by demonstrating, let's say at TRL 6 or 7, and then just duplicating for your scale up to get to TRL 8 or 9. That's a potential advantage over things like amine absorption, where you take the same unit and you scale up the dimensions. But although it's interesting to look just at the maturity level of technologies, I think in carbon capture, you always need to think about the application as well. And I'm glad to see the EU agree with me here. So they produced this other graph. So instead of looking at technologies now, we're looking at applications. And on the x-axis, we have the technology families. And why this is important is because if we look at that mature technology I mentioned there, amine absorption, across different industries, you see a significant range of technical maturity from TRL 6 through to TRL 9, depending on the industry. This is due to complexity associated with different CO2 concentrations in the flue gas, with different levels of impurities like NOx and SOx in the flue gas, and often with integration with the site. For example, amine technologies need steam for regeneration. Some industries don't have steam readily available, such as the cement industry. So maturity, both of the technology and of the application, is an important factor, but what else do we need to think about when selecting a capture technology? So I've grouped these into 3 pools. The first is you need to have a detailed understanding of your flue gas characteristics. It is worth spending money on at the early stages of your project to do a full characterization. You will see that repaid many times over in increased uptime, decreased OPEX. So the CO2 concentration is very important. Different technologies operate better in certain ranges there. So in post-combustion, we're typically looking at amines for low CO2 concentration, especially for like gas turbines, which can be 5% or below. And then you open up more options as you go to 5, 10, and above %. The temperature and pressure is important. It informs how many pretreatment units and the size of those pretreatment units. They can incur significant capital cost. And particularly when we come to looking at new applications of carbon capture, and we're going to see a lot of them coming online in the next few years, starting with Norcem Brevik in the Northern Lights project, we need to think about impurities. This is both for operability of the capture plant and increasingly important for the purity of the CO2 that is being produced. On the site characteristics, where in the world are we? What industry are we in? Do we have biogenic CO2 that we could potentially valorize? How much space do we have available? How complex is it going to be to build a new facility within our boundaries? And very important, and can add a lot of capital cost, do we have the right utilities available? Steam, water, maybe air cooling, and do we have the capacity in those utility systems? The last box, where is our CO2 going? How is it going to get there? Important questions, even if you are just giving CO2 to a third-party transport and storage network, because the answers to those questions will inform your CO2 purity specification that you have to meet. That may require additional treatment, additional costs in order to get there.
And that was Blair McMaster of DNV. Fantastic conclusion to this run through of the event, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Of course, the final bit was the DAC panel, but we'll save that juicy panel for listeners next week. A lot to look forward to there, and that's pretty much how we closed the summit, wasn't it? But what are your reflections on the 2.5 days, Tom?
I mean, for me, I don't think we've said it on this podcast, but when we were there, is a brand new venue for us, a brand new location for us. And for me, it really worked. You said about the new basic setup, I guess, but it's exactly what we needed for this industry, bringing everyone together and discussing the topics that matter.
Yeah, it was a bold decision. We reappraised what the summit means and what it needs. It had always been in Austria since it started in 2016 or 17, and we love that location in the mountains. How many times have we said that?
I do still want to go back.
Same, but it needed a change. It needed a revitalisation. It needed the added capacity and footfall that we know is there for this event. And as you said, it absolutely delivered. And I just think there were so many key talking points that came out of it. And as I said at the start, very much that sense that this isn't our industry anymore, it's everyone's ecosystem. And we've all got a part to play in not only shoring up the CO2 supply chain, which is so critical to industry, but taking carbon out of the equation in all the other industrials. And yeah, those are two twin tracks which must come together. And we'll be bringing even more of that, Tom. I can give a world exclusive here.
Wow.
We'll be back in Rotterdam.
Excellent.
Same dates in March 2026. For the next European CO2 Summit.
Wow, exclusive here on the 1895 podcast. I hope I'm there too.
And that, though, you will be, I'm sure. And those talking points are exactly what we'll be diving even deeper into in 12 months' time. And our theme will be driving the value chain.
And it'll be interesting to see how some of the topics that we've discussed today and over the last couple of weeks develop in the next 12 months. Perhaps DAC will move on to a brand new world of DAC, biogas. Who knows where that will be? Yeah,
and we talked about DAC and the modularity. I think that will really gain ground. This whole CCS, CCUS conversation, I think we established at the event this year. It's not about one or the other. It's both, and it's CCS as a service. Let's unpack that a little bit. I'm already looking forward to that next year. So yeah, there's lots to talk about, and we must never forget how many times have we said. This is one of the most fragile supply chains, so there could yet be unforeseen shortages which we'll need to unpack as well.
So much can happen in the next 12 months, and we'll be in Denver in a few months' time to let's see what happens there first, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of uncertainty in this market, but what is certain, we'll be in Denver in late September for the North American CO2 Summit, and we'll be back in Rotterdam in March 26.
Fantastic. Well, I guess on that bombshell, we should bring this episode of the 1895 podcast to an end. As we've been saying, we'll be back next week to bring you that DAC panel featuring Paul O'Moran of Carbon Collect, Rob van Straten of Skytree, and Matt Atwood of Air Capture. Fantastic panel. You don't want to miss that. So subscribe to the 1895 podcast wherever you get yours to get that straight into your feed.